Welcome to Raising Daughters, the podcast that helps parents learn the best ways to support their daughters as they navigate the high levels of stress, anxiety, pressure, and uncertainty so pervasive in our culture today. Dr. Tim Jordan is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician who has specialized in counseling girls for over 30 years and sheds light on the realities of today's young women in all facets of their lives. This is your opportunity to learn how to better support your daughters, making them feel safe, secure, and truly loved in the midst of life's ups and downs. Here is your host, Dr. Tim.
Hey friends, Dr. Tim Jordan back here with a brand new podcast, Raising Daughters. We come to you every week with a different topic, and I like to pick topics, obviously, that are important to parents who are raising daughters. But, people who have sons also, they would get a lot out of these podcasts as well. The topic today is one we're hearing more and more about, as there's been sort of this movement focusing more on, is it really okay for our kids to be on social media? Is it really okay for our kids to have phones? And why are we all so busy? And so I decided to ask an expert to come on today to give us even more information. Katherine Martinko, there's a subscription or this online thing. You can describe Substack better than I am. It has lots of authors who come on and write articles about different kinds of topics that affect parents. And I really like it. There's lots of really good information on there. And that's how I found Katherine. And so I wonder to come on. She also is the author of a book called Childhood Unplugged: How to Get Your Kid Off Screens and Find Balance. I know there's no parents out there who are interested in that topic. Welcome to the show, first of all, Katherine.
Thanks, Tim. It's good to be here.
And she's, by the way, she's in Canada, and she's got like 30 feet of snow outside her window, like 4 or 5 inches today. And this whole city of St. Louis is crying and whining. And she's like, oh yeah, we have a tunnel to get into our yard. So thank you for coming here from the snow.
Well, this is a great example of when technology is quite useful. All the roads are closed all around my town. I can't actually leave my house right now because of the whiteouts that we've been having for the past few days. So thank goodness to technology for enabling us to have this conversation.
One of the articles that I read that you wrote was just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was called "Parents Need to Do Less." I think this is true in Canada as well, because I travel and talk to people everywhere. It's interesting, and I wanted to ask you why you think parents have gotten so sucked into this race to nowhere, where it's more and more and more, and kids get so involved and they're so supervised, there's so many activities. Why do you think that we've kind of gotten sucked into that?
Well, it's something that I've certainly noticed anecdotally, and then I think it was really brought to the forefront of a lot of people's attention with the U.S. Surgeon General's official advisory that was issued a few months ago about the stress levels that parents are experiencing. And Dr. Vivek Murthy pointed out that parents are substantially more stressed than just the average adult. Why? I think that as a parent, you're always stressed out to a certain extent. You are concerned about your child's well-being. You want them to do well. But our world is a lot more hyper-competitive than it may have been in the past. I think that parents have a lot more fear around what could happen to their child. I think they have a lot more concern over how their child is going to succeed professionally, financially. The economic situation is a lot less stable than it may have been for us when we were growing up or when our parents were young. So there's definitely a lot of sort of heightened emotions surrounding this whole experience. And so parents, they pour themselves into trying to improve their children's chances of success. And often that comes out in the form of extracurricular activities, tutoring. It could be really intensive educational experiences, but those are valuable things to pursue for sure. I understand why parents do that, but in the process, we sort of forget to let the kids play. We forget to just let them be. And we also make our own lives absolutely exhausting as parents because we become the people who are just chauffeuring them around, who are monitoring their homework, making sure that they get all of this stuff done on their very tight schedules. It sort of becomes this assembly line. We're just trying to churn out these children that are going to be successful. But in the process, I don't think that many parents or many kids for that matter are having a whole lot of fun in the process. So that piece that you saw, I wrote it for Jonathan Haidt's Substack called After Babel. The piece was called Parents, It's Okay to Do Less, was really a call to step out of the parental rat race, to give yourself permission to deschedule your lives a little bit and sort of try to find the quieter, slower pace that will benefit all of you as a family.
Part of what's going to have to happen is people are going to need to take it seriously. And they're going to, because the culture is saying something different. I have so many parents who come to my counseling practice with their daughters, and they'll say things like, "I want to give my daughter an edge. I want her to have a leg up." And so they've been conditioned to believe that there's this one path, and we have to have all of our kids, like you said, lined up on this path. It's all about perfect grades and best teams and college scholarships and best college, and I'm stressed out just starting to say all that. Much less the girls I work with, they're stressed out to the max. So many. I just had a high school group yesterday after school. There are 8 girls who are in high school, and they just talk about all the pressures and the stresses on them. It's really, they're overwhelmed, I guess is the best way of saying it.
Yeah, I can see that too in the people that I know. I think too that technology is playing a bit of a role in that because now we live our lives in public. Everything is on display. A lot of teenage girls, especially, are being affected by the amount of stuff that's getting posted online. And so even if they're not doing all the posting, they're seeing everything that everyone else is doing. And it sort of creates a sense of insecurity, maybe a little bit of, just fear that you're not doing what everyone else is doing to try to keep up. And so I think in the past, maybe there was a bit more anonymity, there was more privacy. Everyone sort of stuck to their own path, did their own thing, and was less concerned with what everyone else is doing. But now it's all out in public, it's all on display, and it can really make you feel inferior, like you're just not doing as much as you could be doing. That affects parents too. They worry that they're not keeping up with everyone else and that their child is going to miss out. But I think especially in relation to the technology, because that's sort of the stuff that I think about a lot in my work, I think that we need to really be giving our kids the skills that will set them apart from the machines, that are going to kind of break them out of that rat race, that are going to be the human skills, the ability to connect with other people, to have face-to-face conversations, to really know how to connect with people. Because right now, so many kids are just not getting the opportunities for those in-person interactions. And I think they're very much going to suffer as a result in the long run.
I did an interview with some women in college recently, and they were talking about how when they walk across campus, it's so hard to meet people because everybody's walking with a phone in their face. And even when there's in class, before class, the same kind of thing. And they also describe how they feel so socially awkward. COVID was a layer of that, or a piece of that pie, but I don't think it's just that.
Yeah, I think COVID exacerbated a lot of issues that were already simmering below the surface. We know that, smartphones in particular, but also, I guess the internet, but yeah, smartphones and social media, really that sort of great rewiring that has occurred since the early 2010s has brought out antisocial tendencies in all of us, and COVID made it worse. And I don't think that we've really reclaimed our ability to gather and to converse with people and to know how to interact with people since then. That's why I think it really is quite urgent for parents to take the lead on that and to get their kids maybe out of so many organized activities and just into, casual social gatherings where you talk to your neighbors, you host people in your home, you invite friends over to play. You just sort of re-normalize this idea of interacting with people in a normal way and not doing it online. So a lot of my work is encouraging families to not let a child's primary form of social engagement occur on the internet. It doesn't hurt to have that in part, but if that constitutes the majority of a child's social interactions, they're really going to suffer. We know that online interactions are inferior to in-person interactions for a number of reasons. So really, you want to balance that out. You want the in-person to greatly outweigh the online interactions.
One of the things we blame our teenagers or even preteens a lot because they're on their phones a lot and blah, blah, blah. And they're not getting enough in-person interactions and it's blame. But what I say to parents a lot is that it's our responsibility is we've shrunken their geographic freedom so drastically in the last 30, 40 years. We've gotten so afraid of kids being kidnapped. We've gotten so afraid of predators, all kinds of fears that oftentimes are unwarranted. But things hit the news, get spread. So a lot of parents are afraid of allowing their kids to be out on the street playing because of all those fears. How do you get parents over that?
Yes, parental fears are greatly misplaced these days. There's that great phrase from Jonathan Haidt's book where he says that children are overprotected in the real world and underprotected in the online world. And we really have that backwards. We need to switch it around. So the real world has never been safer to be a kid in than it is right now. It is the greatest time, safest time to be a child. Statistically, for it to be statistically likely for your child to get kidnapped in sort of that stereotypical stranger in a white van scenario, they would have to loiter outside in public for 750,000 years. So it's really probably not going to happen to your kid. However, the likelihood of them being approached by a sexual predator on Instagram or on TikTok or on Snapchat is incredibly high. In fact, Instagram has been described as hosting the largest scale sexual harassment of teenage girls that has ever existed in the history of the earth, because it's so common. So really, if you want to protect your children, you should be getting them off of their devices and sending them out into the real world, where they're going to encounter far fewer creepy strangers than they would online. So I think that that's definitely a real issue. And I think that when you give your kids more independence, and you let them spend more time outside and you can see what they're able to do, it builds your own confidence as a parent. So really, it's sort of this positive feedback loop where as your child proves their ability, you become more comfortable letting them do things. And this does take training. It can be very hard if you've been a bit of a helicopter and held your child very close. Again, understandable. We've all done that. It's very hard to let go. But I'll give you one little example. My 9-year-old son. So I have 3 boys. They're 9, 13, and 15. So he's my third. He's my youngest kid. So I've definitely been around the block a few times in terms of promoting independence with my kids. But a few months ago, he asked to ride his bike about 1.5 miles to Walmart in order to buy a toy that he really wanted. And he wanted me to take him, and I didn't have time. And he begged and pleaded. He said, "I can do this. I know I can do this." And finally, I relented and I said, "Fine, go for it." It was hard. It was very, very hard to just let him go. He had to bike quite a distance. He had to cross 4 lanes of traffic. He had to bike through a huge parking lot, lock up his bike, find the toy in the big box store, do the transaction, all of this on his own. And so I was nervous the whole time he was gone. He showed up about 45 minutes later and he had been successful. He was far more excited about the outing than he was about the new toy that he had purchased. And he just has been walking with this swagger, this independence, this confidence that I don't think he had before. And it was such a valuable lesson in, letting the kids sort of take the guidance or be the leaders in sort of determining what they're able to do. And we as parents have a responsibility to recognize that and to let them do it, let them prove themselves.
I talk to parents a lot about being a safe base for their kids, so that, when their kids are little, they're little toddlers, and if you go to an outing, they'll come and they'll be kind of sitting on your lap, looking around. They're not quite sure. They're grabbing onto your leg. But then after a little while, most kids will sort of get their courage up and they wander off. And then they'll come back a little while later for a little bit of reassurance. Then they go back out. They kind of come and go. And I tell parents what you want to have happen, first of all, is to let them go and toddle off at the family party. But also when they come back, to have that look on your face that says, "You got this. It's okay." It's so good to be out in the world. It's so fun. Have some adventures. But I'm worried that a lot of kids come back to their parents, or when they ask their parents for freedoms, what they get instead is this angst look, like, "Oh my God, the worst thing is going to happen." So we don't become a safe base anymore. We become this base where, I don't know, it's a fear base, I guess is the best way of saying it. So it doesn't give kids the confidence that your son received last week.
Yeah, no, and I think that another thing that you have to fill a child's life with is that independent free play, which often includes risky play. There's these 8 categories of risky play that are said to be very healthy for children in order to sort of test the limits of their physical and their mental capacities. And, it can involve things like playing at high speeds, playing at heights, playing with sharp objects near fire, playing somewhere where they could fall, playing somewhere where they might be able to get lost, like on the edge of a forest. I can't remember all of them. Playing vicariously is another one where you watch older kids engage in activities that sort of kind of scare you, but also fascinate you as a child. And as parents, we have to give our kids the time and space to engage in those things. And we have to stand back. We have to remain on the sidelines as hard as it can be and not interfere, trust them once again to self-regulate, which almost every child can do. There might be a few exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, kids are very good at determining what they're comfortable doing. And they will often astonish us because we don't even understand what they're able to do.
And 2 proofs of that. Number one is your son's experience, where he has a swagger now. He gained so much confidence just from one trip to Walmart on his bike. But also, if we think back to our childhoods, I'm sure this is probably true in Canada as well as it is in the States. When I was a kid growing up, I'm way older than you, but when I was a kid growing up, going on your bike somewhere would have been an afterthought, and nobody cared. My mom used to send me up, down, I don't know, a quarter mile away, and to buy, 2 cartons of cigarettes a couple times a week. We have so much more freedom and so much more unsupervised time, and we all gain from it. And I think if we need to look at ourselves and what we learn having all those freedoms, and also when you allow your kids, like you did your son, the effect of that on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we as parents really need to sort of protect the fact that we have the vantage point of retrospect. Like we are sort of the last, especially my generation is sort of the last generation to be able to remember a childhood without technology, without, we can remember the so-called play-based childhood before it was replaced, colonized by the devices, before it became the phone-based childhood. And so I think it's really important for us to draw on those memories that we have of the things that were the most exciting things about our own childhoods. What did we love the most? Well, usually it was when we were away from our parents. We were out on our own. We were probably outside. We were with a gaggle of other kids, maybe getting up to some mischief. I don't know, but those form the best memories often of our childhoods, and we need to be able to give our kids similar opportunities.
And we handled the mischief, got hurt, and we handled the hurt, and things weren't fair, so we figured that out. I mean, we had to figure it out. I mean, that's the part at the end of the rainbow is we figured stuff out.
It's true. And I remember even I once fell out of my treehouse and broke my arm when I was 8 years old and had to spend a whole summer with a cast on. And, it became this badge of honor because everywhere I went, people wanted to know why I had this cast, and I became really proud of it and everyone signed it. And, it wasn't a fun experience. I wouldn't really wish that on anyone, but it was also sort of this, a mark of my accomplishment, and it just became a good story later. So yeah, you never know. These things are all resilience building, character building experiences for kids.
I think another thing we've lost besides the risky outside behaviors is we don't allow our kids to be bored anymore. We've become their entertainment directors, and we keep shoveling things their way. We take responsibility for it. I think that's also a big loss.
Absolutely. And boredom is something that I tell parents they should not be afraid of. So if you are trying to get your kids off screens, you do have to go through this sort of replacement phase where you replace all the digital entertainment with analog entertainment. And an inevitable consequence of that is going to be boredom, because there will be these swaths of time when the kids just don't really know what to do. They don't have something to reach for to just, instantaneously suck them in. But that's where the really good stuff happens. A bored brain is not an idle brain. It is a brain that is just waiting for something very exciting to happen. And boredom is what stimulates a lot of our best creativity, our musical skills, our poetic, our artistic skills, our athletic abilities. It's because kids are desperate to do something and figure out how to fill their time that they actually are able to pursue a lot of these hobbies and interests that then later become their passions and maybe even their careers. You never know. And so I think by eradicating boredom, we very much do a great disservice to our children. So parents should not be afraid of boredom. And they should not, it also makes a parent's job easier. So this speaks to that question about the stress that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Once you accept that a bored child is simply a child who has yet to discover the next thing that they're going to do, it removes the burden from you as the parent and frees you up to do your own thing and not worry about them nearly as much as you might otherwise.
We're talking to Katherine Martinko, who is an author of a book entitled Childhood Unplugged: How to Get Your Kids Off Screens and Find Balance. And she also has written some articles, more than one, that I've read on the Substack. She's talked a lot about how we can kind of shift the way we're approaching our children's childhood and our parenting. I was going to ask you about the boredom thing. One of the interesting thoughts I got from Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, was oftentimes what's more important than what your kids are doing online is what they're not doing because they're online. And I think that's kind of what you're describing, right? I think that was from his book.
Yep. So he calls them experience blockers. How, a child on a device, they might appear to be distracted, but they're actually sort of in this vacuum. They're completely cut off from everything that's going on around them. He also describes handheld devices as, he uses this great analogy with cuckoo birds. So a cuckoo bird will come into another bird's nest and they'll lay their eggs in this nest that already has other eggs. But the cuckoo hatchling is the one that hatches first. And it hatches and it pushes all the other eggs out of the nest, and then it dominates. It remains in that nest, and it sort of commandeers all the food that the cuckoo mama brings back to the nest. And so he likens this to the way that devices sort of take over a child's life. And once a kid has unlimited access to a tablet, to a smartphone, to video games, they will likely lose interest in most other activities in their life because they simply cannot compete. Those other activities just are not as engaging. They're not as stimulating, as neurologically compelling to use as these handheld devices are. So yeah, very much that is an issue. And that's why it's important as parents to create strict boundaries surrounding the use of these tools, because the kids certainly don't have the capacity to self-regulate when it comes to this. And so I describe myself as an authoritative parent. I'm sure you're familiar with the different categories of parenting: the authoritative, the authoritarian, the neglectful, and the permissive. The authoritative parent does not hesitate to draw those strict rules and to have expectations for how their child handles technology. This is not the most common approach. It's not the most popular. A lot of parents sort of like to manage it. They like to talk about the technology with their kids and kind of trust their kids to use it wisely. I think that's expecting too much of the child, to be quite honest, because we as adults struggle enough as it is to manage our own technology use. I don't think that we can possibly expect the child to do it too. And so we need to be that safe base that you described before. I think we need to create the limits that the child comes to expect, and let them grow from there. Give them the chance to do other things and not have all of those experiences blocked by the presence of that device.
Another thing is, I interviewed a woman last week, Gabrielle Wynn. She's also a writer for Substack, After Babel. One of those places I found an article. She talked about, she has a process. She's a grad student at Harvard. Create this process, I think she called it 5D method for kind of weaning yourself off of phones or social media and stuff. Because one of the things I hear from kids a lot, I heard this yesterday with one of my patients and her, is that, well, all her friends have a phone, all her friends are on these things. And so if she doesn't have these things, she'll be left out, she'll be left behind, she'll lose all of her friends. And the kids are always worried about that. So one of the things she talked about in her method is, if you start to get rid of some of those things like social media, you will have to be more proactive in how you create your friendships and how you connect with people. I think we've sort of forgotten that they can do it. Like at our summer camps, our weekend retreats, I have 18 high school girls coming in 2 days for a weekend retreat. So the first thing we do at the check-in table is, where's your phone? Where's your devices? And they hand them over to their parents. And the girls who've been before readily hand them over, but the new girls are like, oh my God. But what happens is, after a weekend without them, after a week of summer camp without them, all of them say it was amazing. I didn't have to worry about it. I feel so less stressed. They received the benefits, which is we walked around talking to each other. We were connecting. We were sitting after dinner at a picnic table chatting for an hour, and that's one of the things I think they don't get to experience enough to say it's worth it.
Yeah, I am familiar with Gabriella's work. I just found out about it just a few weeks ago, actually, from Jonathan Haidt's Substack, and she runs this program called Abstinent, which I believe is, so she's basically arguing that social media is optional, and that's not told to young people often enough. Instead, there's sort of this assumption that it's mandatory, and it's not. And I can speak from experience. So my 15-year-old, he's in 10th grade. He does not have a smartphone. He does not have social media. He will be able to get a smartphone once he turns 16, but he will not be allowed to have any social media on it. He will not have it before he's 18, because, it's simply not a place that I think any teenager should exist. But you do have to create workarounds, like you said. So, I mean, I don't want my child to feel like he can't have, conversations with his friends or connect with them. So we've come around, we've made up an alternative. So he can have group chats, let's say, on our desktop computer that sits in a common area of our home. All of my kids are able to text their friends from this computer using iMessage. So it works with anyone who has an iPhone. It doesn't work for an Android. They can borrow my phone in that case if they need to communicate with a friend. But there are definitely workarounds. You do have to come up with these alternative methods to communicate and to text friends. And it maybe takes a little bit more work. He's said, oh, it'd be so much more convenient if I just had Snapchat. But I argue that the benefits do not outweigh the negatives, so it's just not worth it. Instead, we have to do this alternative method that's maybe a bit more clumsy, but really, I think the benefit is that it adds friction to the process. He has to come inside, he has to sit down at that computer, he has to log on, he has to check the message in order to respond to it, and then he walks away from it. He leaves it behind. It doesn't go out into the world in his pocket, accessible every single second of the day.
What are some specific things that parents can do to, this may sound like a dumb question, but to kind of guard their kids' time? Because otherwise all of a sudden you're taking your kids, he's on 3 teams this quarter, and the whole family is running around like crazy. So what can parents do to actually really set those limits when everybody around them is doing something different?
Well, you have to be comfortable with being different. It's always a little bit uncomfortable to go against the status quo and forge your own path. But I think that you have to spend time thinking about the things that you value the most as a family, and then making decisions that are going to support that and reflect that. So we let our kids do about one sport. Descheduling, I think, is a big part of this. I should say that, one sport a season. It's absolutely unnegotiable, the fact that we have to sit down together for dinner together as a family every single night. We will adjust the time of dinner according to what people's obligations are, but it always happens. I can't even remember the last night that we didn't sit down and have dinner together as a family. And I find that kind of brings us together. It's just a good touch point for us to check in with each other all the time and know that things are going well. I keep a lot of free time on the schedule just for the kids to be able to play because free play in indoor or outdoor independent free play will not happen unless there are, extensive chunks of time where the kids can actually do that. And then we don't have devices in our house. We don't have tablets. The kids don't have phones. We don't have a TV even, which often surprises people. Again, those are time sucks. We do have laptops. We have the family computer. So it's not that we are anti-tech. We just recognize that we don't want tech to be the main form of our entertainment at all times. So we play a lot of music. Everyone in the family plays musical instruments. We read a lot of books. We play a lot of board games. We entertain a lot. Our house is sort of a social hub. I have found too that investing in lots of outdoor toys for teenage boys in particular will act as a draw. Kids will want to come to our house, and my house is always full of these kids who just want to come use our trampoline or use our garage gym or hang out on our slack line. We've got all these things that kids can do outside, and they are happy to get off their phones and just talk to each other. And I sort of overhear the conversations that they're having, and it's quite delightful to sort of create this alternative environment for everybody to enjoy.
And they don't miss their phones when they're in your garage, in your gym, and they don't miss electronics when they're jumping on the tramp and they're BSing with each other and doing what we did down the street. And there were no parents. You were eavesdropping a little bit, but there's just no parents looking over their shoulder 24/7. I have I have young women who go off to college and their parents are still following them on the 360 app, so they know where they are at constantly. I'm like,
yeah, that's not good. There's actually been a number of studies that show that teenagers who know that they're being tracked by their parents are more likely to engage in risky behaviors because they know that they're being watched or that their parents could find them in an emergency. Whereas when they are not being tracked, they're a little bit more self-aware. They realize they maybe need to be a bit smarter about their choices, about who they go off with, where they might choose to go. So definitely, I think that tracking kids, I'm very staunchly anti-surveillance, and I think that it can maybe create more problems than you might think.
One other piece of the pie we haven't talked about that maybe you can address just quickly is parents have to model. We blame our kids are on their phone so much, and then if you ask probably most adults to whip out their phone and say, check how much time you've been on your devices, it's not much different than their teenagers.
That's true. Yeah, the average amount of time that American adults spend on their phone is 4 hours a day outside of work, and 2.5 of that is on social media. So definitely, we have a serious problem ourselves, and we do need to model behaviors. I think so. There's a great phrase I often think of. It comes from Cal Newport, who's an author. He wrote Digital Minimalism, among many other great best-selling books. And he says, fix your analog life. So if you want to reduce the amount of screen time that you are having, then you need to find things to do. Find other ways to fill your time, whether it's deciding on some career aspirations that you want to achieve, or building a new skill, finding a new hobby, getting in shape, reading more books, getting more sleep, whatever it may be. You need to sort of establish those habits. Otherwise, it's just going to be too hard. You're not going to be able to resist the siren call of your phone. It's just going to keep pulling you back. So if you can sort of set up the structures of all these offline habits and activities, it will be a lot more successful. And your child is watching you. So if your child sees you sitting down to read a book, cooking dinner from a real physical cookbook instead of looking at a device, going for a walk without a device, those are all patterns that the child is going to absorb. And I think it's very important indeed that we be aware that our children are always watching us. It is hard. I get it, because so much of what we do is on our phones. I work online too. One thing I try to do is keep my computer and all of my work-related technology stuff in my office, which is sort of a separate space from the rest of the house. And I try not to work when they're around. So I try to end my workday when they come home from school, and then I spend some time with them, and I'm not on my device, I'm not on my phone. And then if I have to do stuff in the evening after they go to bed, I'll save it for then. I often get up very early in the morning to do work before they're awake. Again, it's not a bad thing. It's just you want to be able to give them your full attention for the time that you are with them. And really, out of a typical school day, it's not that much time that you're in your child's presence. So I think that's the least we can do is sort of give them, that hour, 2 hours of just of focus. And I wouldn't say focus on them. I would say it's also important for the kids to join us in the things that we do as adults. I often try to incorporate my kids into chores that need to be done, into prepping food for dinner, going to the grocery store, doing yard work, whatever it is, just sort of this expectation that they be active contributors to the household. And that too can take kids away from their devices, which is a good thing. It helps to fill that time that remains when the devices are put away.
I remember my wife and I met a dad at a father-daughter retreat probably 10, 15 years ago. And I'll never forget, he said when his kids were young, he would come home from work, walk in the door, and they'd come running up, daddy, daddy, and hug him. And he said, it was one of my favorite times of the day. He said, then I started to notice that they stopped doing that. And he realized it was because he walked in the door on the phone, finishing up his workday. So he said, I noticed it. He said, it like hit me in the face. Like, oh my gosh, my kids aren't coming to the door anymore. So then what he started doing was he would pull into the driveway and stop the car, and he would finish his work in the driveway. And once he was done, he'd put the phone away, and then he would walk in. And he said, and my kids started to come back.
Yeah.
So I think we have to just have that kind of awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot about how often does your child look at you and instead of seeing your face, they see the back of the phone. So that, especially babies, there's some studies that are showing that babies are failing to develop smile reflexes on time, when they typically would, because they just haven't had enough time making eye contact with their parent because the parent's eyes are averted looking at the screen. So it's definitely important. And I think another thing parents need to consider in terms of modeling is what are they taking pictures of all the time? What are they posting online? And how often are they checking for the likes and comments? Like, because if a child sees you checking your Instagram feed to see how many likes or comments you got on a post, you are teaching them that external validation is what matters. That matters far more than your own satisfaction that you might gain from just, being with your kid or enjoying something, an experience together. There's the sense that it has to be posted in order for it to be of value. So I know that has really affected my own habits online. And I actually have deactivated Instagram completely, which sort of felt hard initially, even though I was never an active poster. I kind of liked just having a presence there and being able to connect with people if I needed to. But I'm willing to find some workarounds now because it was starting to feel a little bit too performative for my liking.
One other quick thing. I really appreciate your time. We're talking to Katherine Martinko, who's the author of a book, Childhood Unplugged, How to Get Your Kid Off Screens and Find Balance. And she's also an author who writes articles on a platform called Substack, which I would strongly encourage all of you to check out because she's not the only author who posts really great articles. One of the things I've also noticed, I've been working with kids for over 30 years, and they ask, are kids different today? Because they see them on their phones and all that stuff. And I say it depends on the context. Like, for instance, when they come for a week of my summer camp and they don't have those devices and they are left with each other. And we also have we on purpose have a lot of downtime at our camp. Like after dinner, there's always an after or evening activity the whole camp does together, but we don't start it till like 8 or 8:30. So they have a couple hours at least to just, and so they create games. They take hikes, they do creek hikes, they do stuff that they normally wouldn't do because they'd be so, latched onto their devices. So they do what we did if you just give them the context and the opportunity.
Kids have not changed in 1 or 2 generations. They're the exact same kids that we were, that our parents were, that humans have always been for many, many, many years. It's just that we adults have sort of changed the environment of their childhood in very recent years. And in a way, it's been this horrible experiment that we've inflicted on them without them really understanding it or having any say. And it's not going terribly well. We're seeing that reflected in the rates of, anxiety, of depression, self-harm, even suicide rates have skyrocketed in the last 15 years or so. So I think that we owe it to the kids to sort of establish their environment, to get them off the devices, to return them to the play-based environment that they actually need in order to develop optimally, and they will bounce back. Kids are incredibly resilient. And so I often tell parents who come to me and say, I think it's too late, I don't think I can change what I've done, I say it's never too late. Even if you have a kid who's a teenager who's used to spending excessive hours a day on their phone, all the more reason to get them off it now, to give them a chance at sort of reestablishing those, relearning, maybe not even relearning, perhaps learning for the first time, those habits, those ways of filling their time and becoming comfortable with boredom. It is a muscle that needs to be developed. It takes time, it takes practice, but it's absolutely critical, and the kids deserve it. I really think that it's sort of the least that we can do for them at this point.
So if our audience wants to find you and read your articles and things, where would they go?
Sure. So I have a Substack newsletter. It's called The Analog Family, and I publish articles twice a week on the Analog Family, everything to do with digital minimalism, getting kids off screens, embracing this play-based childhood. So you can find that if you just Google The Analog Family Substack, or the actual website is katherinemartinko.substack.com. I also am a guest contributor to Jonathan Haidt's Substack newsletter. It's called After Babel. I'm a contributor to the Globe and Mail newspaper, which is Canada's largest newspaper. And then I also have my book, which is Childhood Unplugged, Practical Advice to Get Kids Off Screens and Find Balance. It came out in the summer of 2023, and it's available on Amazon, in bookstores, pretty much anywhere that books are sold.
It's a lot of great information that Katherine puts on those sites. So I would strongly encourage all of you listening to this to go to look that up once you're home, not when you're driving your car, and keep reading. And there's great information over and over again, just to keep us on our toes and keep us on track. It's so easy to get off track because there's lots of cultural messages and conditioning is telling us the opposite. So I really appreciate what you're offering to us, to parents and everyone. So thank you so much for that, and also for being on the show today.
Well, thanks, Tim. It was a pleasure being here. Great talking to you.
And send me all those links if you will, and I'll put those in my show notes so that parents who can't write all that stuff down now, they can find it easily on the show notes.
Yep.
Thank you so much, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Well, that was a great conversation with Katherine Martinko, and I promise I will put the links to her information and how to get to her articles and things in my show notes. I strongly recommend you all read her writing. She's a really nice writer. She researches well. She's part of this movement now, I think, which I think is great, about getting our kids back out on the street playing and getting our kids off their devices and giving our kids more unsupervised downtime, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's good to keep opening up our minds to different ways of looking at things as opposed to the same old, same old. I'll be back here, as always, next week with a brand new podcast, different topics each time. Thanks so much for listening in today to Katherine Martinko, and I will see you back here in a week. Oh, by the way, sometime in March, I'm not sure exactly when, probably end of March, my new book will be published. It's actually a revised book. It's called Keeping Your Family Grounded When You're Flying by the Seat of Your Pants. And I wrote it 20 years ago, which seems like a long time ago. So I decided to revise it. I added 4 new chapters. One I'm on social media, one I'm on listening skills, one I'm on youth sports. Anyway, so I think you'll enjoy it. So look for that. It'll be coming out sometime in March. Thanks so much for dropping by here every week. I'll see you back in a week.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Raising Daughters. Hopefully you've learned something useful about girls and young women and how to help them navigate the pressures, challenges, and opportunities of modern life. If you want to become a more effective parent, keep listening to the show at drtimjordan.com and let the conversations shape you. Build that one-of-a-kind connection with your daughters in the most profound and meaningful ways possible, shaping them into strong, confident women of the future. That's all for now. See you next week for another episode of Raising Daughters.